Record. Okay, we're recording.
Okay, well, we skipped all the intros, but that's fine for the recording. I'm going to go through a couple slides here. So we've been doing this Dynamo thing, season 1. We're on season 2 now, episode 2, just to kind of get the firm a little bit more used to computational design, parametric design, algorithmic design, and generative design, all these things that are out there that kind of help ease what we're kind of doing as architects, engineers, designers, interior designers, civil engineers. It applies to everything. Just a friendly reminder, please do not put down any general time. Otherwise, I get a call from Charles. And he says, why did 99 people put 1 hour of general time down? That's never happened, but be considerate about your time for this. So it's extremely practical, and I'm taking kind of a late lunch, and some people on the West Coast are taking an early lunch. It all works out. This will probably be the new meeting time until we get kind of officially sanctioned and can maybe explore this a little bit more. Next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to lay a couple ground rules. Again, welcome our guests, Volvlat, Bill and John. Let's go right into it. Customizing software. That's kind of what this episode is going to be about. I've demoed how to make a building in 60 seconds. I've demoed how to do code review analysis using Dynamo. I've done generative design up on Fractal. We've done a whole bunch of different things, but what I wanted to learn, and this is what I'm most interested in, is how to make a custom tool, I guess, inside of Dynamo. What are nodes, what are codes, what are packages? We're going to just real airbrush over what Python, C#, Zero Touch, JSON, Visual Basic, just terms. I'm not going to expect anybody to kind of learn those things, but those are the things that I'm kind of interested in so that we can make really high-level computational tools to help speed us along. Next slide. So real brief, what is a node? What is code? What is a node to code? And what is a package? So up at the top, sorry, next slide. First top one is code. So if I type 1.10.5, that's going to give me a certain set of numbers. It means it's starting at 1, going to 10, and counting by 5s. So I'd expect to see 1 and 6, which is what you see up on the screen. It's not going to count 1 to 10. If I wanted to do that, I'd start at 0.10.1. So that's code. That's just real basic. We don't have to really understand a whole lot about Python or anything like that. That's a great, really interesting, really fast number set. Code is something a little bit different. So that's already pre-programmed in. And so that's something like the count variable, and I can type in 1 plus 1. And that will give me a count of the variables, not necessarily a count of the addition of it. So if you notice up on the screen, you see 1 plus 1, give me a count by one variable. The variable happens to be 2, but it's not, it's counting. So if I wanted to count, I type in 1 plus 1 equals 2. That's what that node to code does. So if I select all that stuff, right-click, and hit node to code, it's actually going to code it for me. And I think that's what's most valuable for everybody in the room right now. So it says variable T1 or T3 equals 1 plus 1, which is obviously 2. Next slide. These are just terms because John and Bill are so advanced, and we're trying to kind of break this down as simple as possible. So one more thing that I really like to do is, let's say you're coding something, you're scripting something in this program, and you don't come back to it for 3 months, or somebody else starts working on it. It's nice to leave little trinkets behind that kind of say, hey, this code does this, and this is why I put it in there. Hey, this number slider is for this. That's why it's there. Hey, this code block needs to be worked on a little bit. So, sorry, next slide. And you just do that by hitting Shift, Shift W is a note block. Sweet. And if you're really interested, I know I shout this out the very first season of Dynamo, actually episode 1. If you want to learn code, there's some good ones up there: Python, C#, Zero Touch, JSON, Viz Basic. You can go to Code Academy. Heck, SQL would probably be a good one too. But go to Code Academy. Gives you nice. Some people learn from it, some people don't. But just gives you kind of a nice overview of how to kind of do a little bit of coding, and it's free. So go to the next slide. And that should be, yeah, that's it. So we're going to learn how to create, make stuff. I really don't know what they're going to show. I know it's going to be awesome, but everybody bear with me because, yeah.
We're just going to show really cute cat videos for the whole lunch hour, if that's okay. So that was in the agenda. So thanks, Ryan. Appreciate the intro, and it sounds like you guys are looking at this. I'm curious. So I'm going to just talk to the Denver folks. How many of you guys have been using Dynamo at all, like to some degree, on any projects? Has anyone started using Dynamo on anything? Scott, and that's it. Okay. Okay. So that's all right. This is good. So hopefully this is like a good, I mean, everybody knows what Dynamo is, correct? No? Some yes, some no. Okay, so Dynamo is basically a visual programming environment, similar to Grasshopper is for Rhino. It's basically an Autodesk answer to that. So it's the idea of visual programming for Revit to automate processes, to make you more efficient, etc. So it's a little, John will go more into the specifics and give you guys some examples, but I wanted to try to, before we really kick things off, to try to get a pulse of the user level, you know, how much you guys have been using it. So Ryan did a great job introing us. I'm just going to add that really what I want to ask is like, who is Evolve Lab and like why should you care? Like, you guys obviously could have been doing other things with your lunch hour right now. Could have been checking your Facebook status, you know, could have been checking the latest sports stuff, all that stuff. So you're actually coming in and trying to learn and better yourself. So I think that's really awesome. Kudos to you. I'm not going to bore you guys with a whole lot of stuff, but what I want to say is basically what we do is we try to give you guys superpowers, all right? So if you have a repetitive task that you're doing all the time and it's just very, very tedious, maybe a question you could start asking yourself is there a way to automate this, right? So for example, everybody loves creating print sets, right? Friday, got to get the PDFs off to the consultants. That's our most favorite, exciting job to do. Well, if there was a way that a Dynamo script could like automate that process, so that way you can spend more time designing, more time on that waterproofing detail, etc. So that's what we kind of do. Like that's Evolve Lab in a nutshell. It's basically trying to be a support arm for you guys to make you guys awesome. Is basically the end goal. This is a little teaser. So we're going to be doing Form It Friday tomorrow. So if you guys are interested in learning more than just Dynamo, but also understanding how some of these visual programming tools tie into, say, conceptual massing, conceptual modeling, design techniques, parametricism, that type of thing. This is one of the buildings we're going to go over tomorrow. So if you guys are interested in that. John is our resident guru. He's going to take it over in just 1 second. I have one more thing to show. So like for superpowers, do you guys do BOMA? Some BOMA, I'm assuming? Yes, get a lot of head nods. So this is like another script that we wrote that basically does BOMA for you. So over on the right is a building. You have your areas. Over on the left is a Dynamo script. Don't be intimidated. It's actually a lot simpler than it looks. And basically what it does is it takes all those areas, it finds your vertical penetrations, the way that you want to do it, either method B or method A for BOMA, executes it and gives you a table in the BOMA format, similar to what you would see in Excel if you're familiar with that process. So cool, fun, sexy stuff as well as very practical, pragmatic stuff. And then I want to mention that we also have like other free stuff. I can talk more about this at the end. But if you guys are interested, we're all about like giving back. So we just launched this thing called a membership. And so it gives you exclusive access to our community forum. So if you guys have a Dynamo question and want to understand more about how to build Revit families or anything like that, we have a community for that. We just released Speaker for Dynamo last week. So that's our own Dynamo package that we're giving to anyone that wants it. We have a newsletter and some training videos as well. So if you guys want to know how to push Grasshopper into Revit, what's new with Revit 2018, et cetera, those are things that you can find for absolutely free, just so you know. So just trying to get back to you guys, okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John. John, you ready to rock and roll?
Yeah.
All right.
Are you guys able to hear me? I had to switch headsets because Chrome and all kinds of craziness.
Yeah. Yep, we can hear you and we can see you. So I'm going to make you presenter.
All right.
And let me add PowerPoint.
Let's see which screen you're seeing. There we go. So you just should see white desktop, Evolve Lab logo, branding, cool. Right?
Yes, we see branding and we see cool, so we're good.
All right. So I just want to kind of round back too. So one person's used Dynamo quite a bit. Everyone's at least kind of heard of it from Ryan or from other resources as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. If there's any questions while I'm going through all these examples too, shout them out. I like questions. Interrupt me. I won't get mad. We'll still be friends. So if you have any ideas, just let us know too. I want to start out with like a brief overview. So defining Dynamo's actually a real big pain. Dynamo's not just a software. It's actually a community of really great people who do some pretty awesome things also. So Dynamo is a software, it's a community, it's a process, it's all these different things. So I always like to make a point of that. As you're learning Dynamo,
there's Dynamo. They're actually talking about Dynamo. So.
Oh. So forum, you can go on here, learn, ask any question you want. Dynamo 1.3 came out today. So there's questions on that people are asking. I'm on here all the time, like just while I'm like saving stuff in Revit and working, I'm always on here. They have a blog post about new stuff in 1.3. Dynamo is always changing, so staying up to date takes a little bit of work. So get on the blog, on the forum, and on a website called Dynamo Builds. That's where you get the latest and greatest versions of Dynamo. And now that is 1.3.0. So that's kind of where that is. Let's get right into it. We're going to jump into Revit, and we're going to just start a blank file, nothing in it. I didn't pre-bake this file at least, kind of like the cooking shows, right? So what we'll do is Dynamo's under the Manage tab. Then we can click on Dynamo. It actually just moved to Manage tab in Revit 2017. Before this, it's on the Add-ins tab. I really like it being on the Manage tab because it helps me manage Revit because Revit's stubborn. So Dynamo's pretty cool because it lets me do things Revit can't do on its own, which I really like. Let's see. You guys had a few sessions where you've just talked about general Dynamo stuff too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's one thing. I'll just kind of go through some stuff. Have you guys ever talked about celery? It sounds kind of funny. Just have you seen anything about celery? Do you guys like celery? No, I'm just kidding. In Dynamo, in Dynamo, I actually mentioned the user community. That's really awesome. It's full of really cool people that do cool things, which means that users create really cool workflows just from scratch to be able to help you do really cool things in Revit. So there's a whole series of Dynamo packages out there that do some neat things, one of which is called Celery. I have no idea why it's called Celery, it just is. If you're familiar with Grasshopper, you're pretty familiar with the ability to use these little graph mappers and generate these pretty awesome shapes that are kind of wild. So what we'll do is my toggle is acting strange. What we'll do is we'll undo the bake into Revit.
I've had that issue before too, where I need to like disconnect it and then reconnect it.
Yeah, I have so I'll talk about these inputs too. So for any Dynamo packages, I'll send a list to everyone after this training. You get them from the package toolbar under search for a package. Wait for a second while it loads, and then install right away. It's called Clockwork, Lunchbox. Rhythm is mine. I have one that I've had going for a few years now called Rhythm. It's actually the 4th most downloaded just this week, so I'm all pumped about that. We have Beaker, which is ours, Celery, which I'm about to show. Marcelo has one called Simplex, which I might show a little later. I'll send a list to everyone. Your package library will be way smaller than this to start out, but mine's gotten huge because I download all these packages. The one I'm showing right now is actually Celery. So we get to generate these pretty cool undulating faces within Dynamo to use them in Revit. So the logic is we have some user inputs. Ryan touched on it briefly. It's really important to document notes. I think it's like adding notes in anything. Like here's what this does, do this, change this, and you can have fun with it. So I always have a user inputs portion, and then you can name them logically. So currently I have stuff like this one should be facade length. So facade length. You just double click on the node. You can change the name of it, and then you can actually start to tweak it. So we could see that updating live in my background actually. So Dynamo is running really quick in the background and generating this pretty wild surface for me. So what we'll do is we'll stretch that out. We'll go ahead and change the height a little. It's calculating all this for me really quickly. What it is this is starting to get us into parametric design where stuff interacts with each other. It's waiting for something to happen and then it's saying, oh, let me do something else. So all I'm doing is generating some splines that are reflective of these little graphs. This node is really awesome. It just came out, but we can start to tweak, and it's kind of hard to grab. We can start to tweak how this thing starts to warp and shift. This is probably along the lines of a less practical example, but it's still pretty fun, and we'll go ahead and drag that out. So I have this surface kind of generating. If I jump back in Revit, nothing's happened yet. Revit's just how it was. The only thing that's changed is I might have some undos that say Dynamo. Nothing's been baked into Revit. That's kind of the term, is I'm not baking it into Revit quite yet. So what we're able to do is I like to build logic into all of my stuff to where I have a toggle. So on-off switch, if you will, to be able to think about how is this going to come into Revit. So that's down in this end of the graph. So I'm generating curves right here, and then I'm generating this lofty surface. In Dynamo, if you select a node, it'll actually select it in the background for you. So we could start to get start to figure out a few things as well. These ones are yellow because I am actually forcing an error on purpose. That way it won't bake stuff into Revit and start turning for a while. The minute you push geometry into Revit, it has to create it, so it takes a bit. So I'm actually forcing that error on purpose. So don't get too scared when you see yellow errors. It's not the worst thing in the world all the time. And then I have two options built into this graph. So a lot of times I build stuff with a few options in mind for logic. I came from an architecture firm as well, and it's all about options. We always want to have options to be able to check things out, which is great, and I think that's awesome. And Dynamo really supports that. So I have two options. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but in Revit, we have something called a curtain system, which can do a really cool undulating glass facade, but it needs to be hosted to a mass. It's not the worst thing in the world, but that's what needs to happen. So what we could do is we can actually use that along with Dynamo geometry as well. And let me go ahead and load a panel family in here that I had created. So let's see, panel. So right now I just loaded a panel. If I hit CM for component, it's a 4-point component that just has corners. So now I have a panel that could think very logically. If I jump back in Dynamo, I can actually go back to the beginning and see, do you want a curtain system, which is a bit foreign to some people, or do you want individual panels, true or false? So you make a decision for your users. In this case, I'll do individual panels, and then I'll hit true. So it'll start chugging for a second, because what it's doing right now is it's actually, if I pick the right family, I just loaded the family and I have to pick it. So if I actually pick that panel, it'll place panels for me without a surface in Revit. So it's using the Dynamo surface to generate Revit geometry that I can schedule and use and start to do pretty neat things with. So doing the little graph mapper and tweaking those splines, I'm able to have all these components placed for me and start to do a really cool facade. And we have a phone ringing. Is everyone hearing a phone ringing?
Yeah, I think it's in our room.
Oh, no, sorry. Sometimes that happens.
So it's better than me hearing myself. I always get so confused when I hear myself. But yeah, so now we have individual panels placed really quickly, and I placed how many panels? I placed 132 panels like that. That's a lot faster than me doing that in Revit, because I've been told before Revit can't do curvy forms, so I'll just let Dynamo do it for me then, right? If we don't like individual panels, we can actually do things like switch it over to a curtain system pretty quickly. All I need to do is switch a toggle. Dynamo goes, oh, you want the other option. So let's go ahead and generate the other option for you so you can see what's going on. Once again, that needs hosted by a mass. And now this is an actual curtain system that we can use. This is kind of a nice option because if we want to change it even more, we can edit the type, and actually I'll just modify it right in the type. We could change it to a different spacing, and it'll update like that without Dynamo now. So I like to use Dynamo as well for generating my first option, and then I'll go through and tweak it to what I want. So I'll change this one to 6 or something, and now it'll get a little more wavy. So that's with a curtain system. We can go ahead and look at it like in a nice pretty view, real quick view, because that's fun. I always use shadows, and I always use lighting. That's a little cranked up. But yeah, so now we can start to get this really cool glass facade as well. So What's really neat is since I've built options in mind and I've kind of prepared for that, I could change things like how many vertical panels I have in the case of individual panels. So if I hit false, Revit's in the background thinking and replacing those panels now. Dynamo's really good about being associated with the panels and everything in Revit. What we could do is if we want another option that has more vertical panels, I'll just do like 16. It'll think for a moment because Revit's updating. And then we should have one that has a few more panels running from left to right now. It also depends on kind of your processing on your computer. But yeah, so now I have a new option generated with some panels, and there's kind of like a nice shot right there as well. I know we're not always doing buildings that look like this, but you could start to scale this and do it on a smaller scale as well. That's kind of like my big like ooh ah example. I'll get into something a little more practical.
Let me jump into it. The reason we kind of don't see buildings like that is because we don't have the tools to actually do that. Now we do. So I think you're starting to see a lot of the bigger firms like the Wood Baggots and HOKs doing that because they can, and there's some beauty in that form, the capacity to do that now.
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's a good point to make.
If I could comment on that too real quick before we move on to John. So I'm curious, two things I want to mention. One is a question and one's a statement. Is so John talked about like using this, like maybe, you know, the facade would be like super expensive to design like a curtain wall like this, but maybe there's like some kind of interior example, right? So like I've done this before as like an undulating beam system in a lobby space, you know, much smaller scale, just kind of fabricated, CNC'd it, so much smaller scale, much easier to kind of try to fit into the budget. So that would be like an example of trying to take this exact example that John's giving to like a smaller scale. The question I always like to try to have a little dialogue too, so I'm curious, and I'm talking to the Denver folks or anyone else that's on the line, do you guys see any kind of application for this at all in your day-to-day work? Are you intrigued by this? Are you bored by this? Does it seem interesting to you? What's your guys' feedback on what John's showing here? I'm kind of curious. Get a pulse. And be honest.
Well, we've had some projects in Dubai that the client requested real fancy curtain walls like this, and we had to do generic models to represent them because we didn't have this functionality in it. So this would be excellent for future projects with them.
This is great feedback. Thank you.
The client requested that. Think about that for a second. Yeah,
they requested a real curvy, funky panel wall.
Is we need to get on this in a hard
right.
way.
Can we take, where you're doing manual input, can we actually have another program feed in inputs? Thinking like an auditorium. Mm-hmm. The acoustical model is formed and kind of what's coming through, you can actually come up with a crazy shape like that that could perfectly model and essentially just drape over what that acoustical program is spitting out. Can you tween those together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is like if you have an existing model, say like an acoustical ceiling in auditorium, is there a way to take that data, say from an acoustic consultant, and drape your geometry on top of their model to kind of represent that?
Absolutely, yeah. So like, I have another example. I might not go through it too much, but yeah, you can work with any surface. We actually we did like a April Fool's post, which was pretty fun actually. But what we did is we got a mesh of a dog, a 3D scanned dog, and I actually segmented it and made a panelized dog out of it. I know that's an example of a dog, but if we have some constraints, we can use those constraints and build upon them very easily. So I think that's a cool point to make. This one I'm generating my own surface, but you can work with any surface. What I'll do is I'll close this one. And if there's any other questions, go on and I'll open something else that's a little more, slightly more practical.
Yeah, for Bill. Oh, okay. Now we got it. Now we got fabricated. Oh no, we can't do that trapezoid, Bill. It's just impossible. Well, what do you say to that?
Those were actually all square panels that I actually just placed.
Let's pretend it was a little bit harder. Okay. You could use the unfold package, unfold it, and then it, labels it, 01, 02, 03, 04, and just it flattens it out, puts it in. You'd throw it out in CAD if you wanted to, and then we'd load that in the model, and it already documents all the panels for you and then you send that to a CNC or in your case, a laser cutter, and you cut out those panels, and then they're numbered. They show up on the site, and they put it together like Legos. So these complex forms they're complex, but they're not impossible to build. You just got to be smart about it.
Yeah, the beauty is since we're generating them in Revit, we have all that data at our disposal now. So we have width, height, X, Y location. We can start to generate panel schedules. Pretty fun stuff.
Anyway.
Sweet.
All right, so I had kind of another quick one. I won't explain everything again, but I actually saw something the other day where someone had a desk with pins on it that were undulating, so like a reception desk, and they had all these wood dowels on it, and it was undulating, and like they just did that in their lobby just for the heck of it. Like they rationalized the form and did that. So I kind of modeled a quick desk. I select the face of it and go back into Dynamo once it stops thinking. I just made this example right before this meeting, so hopefully it still works. Yeah, so now we have really quickly all these little dowels generated for us as well, based off an existing surface. So that's why I kind of wanted to show that example, is I modeled like a little desk, and then I used that surface to then apply something onto it. So that's kind of something I wanted to show as well.
Could you make that real quick in SketchUp? Just knock that out.
Zing.
But yeah, so there's that one as well. And that's something I saw someone build recently on like a reception desk. That was kind of fun, you know.
Cool.
That one's a slightly more practical. We'll keep going from less practical to more practical.
He's the one to take that out.
All right, so is there any other kind of questions on those? And if there's more, just shout them out too. So let's see. I actually came from an architecture firm where we didn't do undulating as much, but we did a lot of randomized panel sizes. I don't know if anyone's ever had to do those. So if we, I've seen it done with components like I just did. I've seen it done to where, I've seen people do it in SketchUp. Ryan joked about it, but I've seen people do it to where they actually go through and draw lines and segment a face until they like it. But as a human, as a person, it's very hard to be random. Computers are really good at being random, and we're not as good. So I had to meditate on this for a while when I was at that firm, is what's a good way to give myself some constraints? So I'll just do a 10-foot curtain wall. A good way to give myself some constraints to be able to, and I'll make it 20 actually, to be able to tell the computer, let's randomize some stuff for me. So what we're able to do in Revit at least is set out a layout rule for curtain walls. So if I edit the type of a curtain wall, do fixed distance at like 2 feet, so I'm going to define minimum panel sizes. So whatever like the project architect wants to be the smallest possible panel, I could set those up. So I now have my minimum panel defined. This is a planar surface that'll have panels that are divisible by 2 feet. It'll be a very pretty normal surface. So what we could do, and I'll open my example to show it first, and then we'll go right into it. What I can do is I can actually use Revit and exploit some of its features to benefit me, because let's just face it, I'm a little lazy and I don't want to do all the individual grids myself. There's better stuff I could be worrying about, right? So I'll let the computer do that. In Revit, we're given this really cool little magical tool. If I tab select a grid line, if it won't tab select all of them, there it is. If we tab select the grid line, we're given this cool little option of removing segments. So if I go through, I can start to remove segments and get different panel sizes that are schedulable. The area is pullable. You could shoot elevations, 3D views, all that stuff. But I don't want to go through and do that to every grid. That's not the funnest thing in the world. So what we could do is so Ryan touched on as well, we're using built-in nodes a lot of the time, but sometimes we need to get into things like Python. So since that's something that I can do in Revit through the UI, I'm able to automate that through Python as well. I'm actually hearing myself again, so that freaked me out. So in Dynamo, if we have nodes that are just kind of flat like this, they're typically built-in nodes. Sometimes those are zero-touch nodes as well. But if it's stacked, it's a custom node. If we go inside of a custom node, oftentimes we could see that there's a Python script embedded. So if I double-click on a Python script, we could see a whole bunch of the more intimidating code for sure. I learned Dynamo at AU 2014, so Autodesk University 2014. I didn't know how to code at all. I knew HTML from high school, but I've started to get into more Python, so it's actually expanded my interest as well. So we have the option of out-of-the-box nodes, Python nodes, or refined C# nodes. In this case, this example uses Python. I'm actually going to turn down my audio because I hear myself. So what we're doing is we need to select a curtain wall, shuffle up all those grids, and remove some for me. The computer can do that way faster than me, so I'm going to let it do that. This specific graph is actually also geared towards working in Dynamo Player, which came out in Revit 2017. So one of the things I've heard a lot is people don't want to open these graphs and get intimidated because of all the spaghetti wires everywhere, and they just don't want to deal with it. The really cool thing is in Revit 2017, they gave us access to this Dynamo Player. If I click on that, it gives me this little playlist just to hit run, just like add-ins. So what it'll do is on the first run, it takes a second. And I see this being useful for starting to get more people interested in Dynamo, because now we're basically building Revit add-ins on our own, which is pretty sweet. So what I have is you point to a folder. In my case, it's my April presentations folder. And then we can actually run some Dynamo graphs. So this example is randomized curtain wall grid. So I'll hit play. So you hit play just like an add-in, like when you click on a button on an add-in, and you can start to do some really cool things. What it's doing is it's actually running Dynamo in the background for me. So it's thinking and it's starting to generate this stuff for me without actually opening Dynamo. And I've noticed that it runs slower on the first time, so that's kind of why that's a little slower right now as well. What we could do is, this is another excellent example of Dynamo's community being awesome. A guy coded all of these cool user interfaces and gave them to everyone to use. So with Dynamo Player, we can actually embed how the plugin works in this little animated GIF or GIF, whichever side of the fence you're on. So we'll have that animated. We can add selections to it. I'll select my curtain wall. This is actually isolating walls only, so I can't select like a toilet by accident, so that's pretty cool. And then I could tell it to randomize the vertical grids, and let's remove about 42% of them. And then I say go. So what I did is, just using Dynamo and some packages that are freely available, I basically made a Revit add-in for myself pretty quickly, which is pretty awesome. So now we can see that the computer or Dynamo generated a random result for me right away. So now I have all these different grid sizes. Each one of these grids is schedulable. It has area to it and all that cool stuff. If I want another option, I can hit undo, run it again, and change it to maybe do the horizontal instead. We'll change it to that one. Once it's done running, it'll randomize the horizontal now. So this is something that's reusable. Any user can just hit play and follow the directions, and you can start to explore this other stuff. This is a far more practical example. I think on like nearly every elementary school at the firm I worked at, we did like panels all the time. They loved panels. So you can also change it from glass. But that's a little more practical and showing Dynamo Player. That's kind of what I wanted to get with that. Is this Dynamo Player, we could start to embed a lot of this cool logic right into our Revit window. So that's pretty fun. Are there any questions on that?
Looks awesome.
That is amazing. I'll just echo that. It's not just, you don't even have to use this for glass systems. You could use this for metal panels. You could use this for fiber cement panels. You can use this for anything that you can possibly think of that you want to do something cool with. So there's a lot of possibilities here. DLR is an interdisciplinary firm. We've got some structural engineers in the room.
Oh, cool.
So I guess, can we do this with structural beams and structural columns and things like that?
Yeah, we actually, I don't have the example loaded. That's the downside, because Dynamo 1.3 came out and they took away Revit 15 support for that one. So I installed that one this morning, and then I realized that. We actually have because Revit 18 is getting ready to come out, so they stay 3 versions. So in order to stay on Revit 15, you need to download Dynamo 1.2. So keep that in mind if you have 15 projects too. We actually have a client who does facades, and they do mullions, transoms, and all this stuff for these cool curtain wall systems. and they used structural framing for the transoms and mullions, and then they used for like the actual vertical members, they used columns. So we were placing structural elements with Dynamo based on like these grid lines that were drawn with reference planes. So what they did is the architect gave them constraints. We selected them all and pressed run, and it was pretty fun. I don't think I have like even a screenshot of it handy. But yeah, you can, if you could do it in Revit through the UI, like manually placing something, you could pretty much do it in Dynamo, just to kind of wrap that up, that answer.
If I can add on.
I'm trying to get the myth, the man, the legend himself, Marcello Sgambarelli, to show up to our LA office. I just need Mike Ehlers, cough, on the line to open the door for him and let him come in and do that. He's an amazing structural engineer and knows is the guy for Dynamo. I mean, he's just an amazing guy. I mean, we could talk about him for hours, but trying to get him in for episode 7 this year or something along those lines. So yes, it can be done for structural.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the example that John was talking about with that curtain wall facade, that client of ours actually was a structural engineering firm. Like that's their bread and butter. They're a structural engineering firm, and they've started getting into the facades world to start trying to compete with the likes of Enclose and those types of things. But they are a structural engineering firm by trade. So
Can Dynamo help analyze how loads transfer through that structure?
yeah, because it's just data. So I can let John talk on that, but it's just data within any kind of any Revit component. So if there's load data that is being captured, we can take that, push and pull it to other environments.
And
Yes,
structural is not the only other discipline at DLR. There's also mechanical and electrical. So I'm assuming the same thing could happen for that in terms of I need a CFM of this, do something for the ducts. Could that also be implemented?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I know the answer is just going to keep being yes, but definitely. I was trying to find a screenshot.
You're fine. I can explain that. We're actually trying to. Steve Ray on the line from our Seattle office. We're actually able to basically automate ASHRAE 62.1 if we had a little bit smarter families. We've had this discussion. John Fernandez, feel free to jump in, but there's ways that we can apply this to architecture, structural, MEP. Just it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I've developed a couple of routines that will push the room number into the door tags so you don't have to manually type those in. And I was going to be releasing that for a beta test. And another script will calculate the room occupancy load based on a function of space. So I'm going to be sending those out for beta testing.
Awesome. Yeah, those are great uses for it for sure. I was trying to find an image this whole time. There's actually someone who's doing structural loads on columns with Dynamo, and what they're doing is they had these circles that were getting generated, and they get bigger depending on the load on the column. I can't remember who was doing it. Maybe I'll find it later and send it to everyone. But yeah, if there's data to be used, you can use it with Dynamo, which is pretty fun. I think it's pretty awesome. So let's see. I'm trying to see how much time I have. We got like 14 minutes. Everyone's still one-ish. Well, one my time, I guess. What I could do, so we talked about what like a Python node was. We talked about like out-of-the-box nodes a little bit. Some of the stuff that just comes with Dynamo, custom packages. If anyone just like definitely gets an interest for it, you could potentially get into stuff like, oh, it's not going to work on full screen. Really?
It worked for a second there.
Yeah. My Visual Studio is not liking me. So I mentioned like I didn't know coding or anything like that before Dynamo. I actually have started learning C# as a result of it. Bill touched on it. We have a Dynamo package called Beaker. It's all C#. It's all like legit code that people use for like actual Revit add-ins and things like that. So what we go from strings, boxes, and wires and all that stuff, we get into doing all this code that is really fast. I mentioned it before, the computer is fast at doing this stuff, and we're not as fast. Like counting stuff, like, oh my gosh, it could count things way faster than even a Revit schedule or more accurate, which is pretty awesome. So we have our whole, this is Beaker, kind of the like the raw what Beaker is. What that results in is a lot of pretty cool functionality that I think we needed, and I'm glad that we finally built it. We have like a whole site for it to explain everything that works, but we're able to do collectors, filter things based on criteria. I found myself nearly every time I was in Dynamo having to filter something out. Someone made a joke that I'm like the filter by Boolean mask king, because I always use that. So we have all these filters. So like I want to filter walls by the name contains the letter P for partition. I could do that now with element filter by name. I could start to filter all this data based on these nodes that we created just to give them to everyone. Another one that I really enjoyed making is a collector of curtain walls, because in Revit, if I want to collect all of something, I could do a categorical selection, so category walls, and I could do all elements of category. So this is like the bare minimum. This is how I grab stuff in Revit with Dynamo. Cool. I collected all my walls in this advanced sample project. Which ones of these are curtain walls? I don't know. I'd have to do some filtering, like figure out like wall type dot kind to see what kind of wall it is, and then I have to filter it, and I have to do all. It's not so fun. So I actually built this whole filtering node that's collector dot of curtain walls, because I found myself having to collect curtain walls a lot. We instantly gather which ones are curtain walls. So if I click on that, it'll actually bring me to a view that's showing me the curtain wall. That's in Beaker. That's one of my favorite nodes in there, because we're actually starting to filter things. So that has a bunch of filters in it. You guys could go check it out. It's pretty fun. It also has stuff for obtaining title blocks on sheets. So this is more practical things. I kind of joked about how we need to be a little more practical sometimes. So that's what I'm showing. What we could do too is like filter by names. So walls, let's figure out what a wall is in here. We'll filter them out by a wall starts with E for exterior, or EXT even. We can even do it on a few criteria. In Dynamo, if I double click.
EXT would be great because that's our kind of standard go-to. We have EXT and INT.
Oh, cool. Perfect. That's what these are supposed to support completely. So if I double click, I get a code block. I type quotes, that turns it into a string, which is text. That's the simplest way to think of it. And then I can type in EXT or INT, end quote. And now I can start to figure out which walls are which. So 122 interior walls and 26 exterior walls, or at least start with the word EXT. So really quickly I'm filtering this data. I have a total of 180 walls down to 26 without me having to think about it much more than that. So there's a lot of filters. This is super practical stuff. It's kind of, I show like the big undulating stuff and then the more practical.
So John, can I add on to that real quick too? So just regarding like applicability, like we show these crazy curvy things, but first point of making this practical, I was just talking to someone this morning, I don't know if you guys have run into this, I have, where I find like elements that are on the wrong level. Like, you know, as people get really gung-ho about creating levels in Revit, and then pretty soon like your sections are just covered with them. You're like, oh, there's too many levels, we got to remove these. But then if you remove a level, what happens to all the elements on that level? They disappear, they get deleted, right? And so like, there's nothing in Revit that allows you natively to say, show me all the things that are on level 2. Like you can't do it. But with Revit, and specifically with Beaker or Dynamo, like I've used these nodes specifically for that. It's like, okay, let me target all the elements that are on a specific level, let me move them to another level, and then I feel comfortable and safe. I get a warm and fuzzy about deleting that level instead of before. Like if I delete it, oh no, did I delete, you know, all the sinks in my project or something? So there's a lot of really valid applications for this too, beyond just like, you know, crazy facades. Sorry, John, go ahead.
That makes a lot of sense. So like your example, you're saying furniture or something like that that's on a level. So if I go, I just need to verify what that parameter is called because I forgot. Level 01 entry level. So what we can do is we can also filter by, I'll type entry level. It is case sensitive. It's kind of the nature of the database. That's the value, and then the parameter is level. So now I got 75 of 104 furniture items on level entry level. Really quickly filtering stuff to be able to use it in ways that make sense to me. So that's a great comment that you made as well. Because I've had people delete levels and you're like, where'd all my call outs go? And it's like, oh, they're gone. You're done. So you can start to analyze that and start to assess the risk with changing something like that, which is pretty cool. I'll get into one more thing that I think is the next step of practical that I think is pretty cool, is we're able to harvest stuff like what type something is. So every wall has a type. You have wall types in your project. Let's say you want to analyze usage of these wall types to be able to start to purge or delete things logically. Dynamo's really good at grouping things. It's called group by key. I love this node. I use it all the time. It's awesome. All a key is shared criteria between elements. So you can think of it as something that the elements share. In this case, all these walls share element type. So keys, and my list is my walls. So I connected all those nodes, and now I have some groups of what those walls are by their wall type pretty quickly. This is getting way closer to the very practical, everyday use right here. What we can do is, once again, thanks to the awesome Dynamo community, we can start to chart this stuff pretty well. So if I want something like a pie chart of all of my data, I can start to get counts. So Ryan talked about it at the beginning. I want to obtain counts of all those wall types. Why does it only show 8? That's a little weird, right? It's showing 8 because since I now have them grouped by type, it's now what is called nested. So it's like in Excel when you indent over. So all I need to do is right click on the node, change it to longest, and it'll give me the count of each wall type. From there, I could say that that's the wall type's values, so how many of each. And then this node's also really cool because it outputs the keys that they're grouped by. So I need to get the name of those keys to convert it to something that could be usable. So you need keys, names, and then we could start to generate a pie chart based on, it's a package called Mandrill. We could generate this chart really quickly. So what I'll do is window, and there's instructions on this on his site and everything too. We'll do chart. It'll think for a second because it's actually built off something called D3, data-driven documents. So it's building this really cool chart in the background. Let's hope GoToMeeting doesn't decide it doesn't want to allow me to do that. So we'll see. Okay, cool. So I built it. I'll tie the report in and hit launch window. So I think that's been like 3 minutes that I've been working on through that example or two. Let's see. This better launch my window. There it is. So in a few minutes, the names are a little wonky because I'd have to change some of the formatting, which I'm not going to do right now. I have a interactive chart based on wall types, and I can start to get a big picture of what wall types I'm using the most of. These labels I would have to tweak because they're going off past the cutting area. But we could see right away, I have a whole lot of whatever this interior partition is just by that chart being able to interact with it. So you can start to do things like window to wall ratio. You can group east-west, have different charts for each one. You can do things like that. But that, just in a few seconds, you start harvesting data from Revit that's not as usable as easily. You could do this in a schedule, but it's not graphic. You'd have to go out to Excel or something like that. That one's called Mandrill once again, so get that one right away, definitely. That's kind of what I had. If there's questions, I'd like to take them, or more discussion. Bill, Ryan, anything?
Oh yeah. So I'm glad you ended on that because the previous episode was Fractal, and I think even before that was Power BI. And so if we didn't have Mandrill or wanted to maybe take it a little bit further, and we wanted to put like sometimes we want to pump the brakes. We don't want to constantly be feeding out information. So we want to have that stopgap between, okay, we're making stuff in Revit, we're making, and then that schedule is constantly changing, and the furniture schedule, the wall schedule, whatever is constantly changing. Okay, let's see what we have. Then we use Dynamo, export that to Excel, hit refresh in Power BI, gives us the same output as Mandrill, but we can share that on the web and basically share that throughout the company, and it's just really fantastic.
Definitely.
So one of the questions was, could we bake some of that data, like kick it out to, say, a PDF or other things?
Definitely. So there's actually a whole PDF section in here. I haven't ever used it, actually, but you can print it out to a PDF. So you give it a file path. This report goes to report, and then I guess there's a PDF style. Yeah, you can start to specify specify sizes and stuff like that. So that way it can get back to a little more of that like static PDF that Ryan was talking about as well.
Conrad's a badass.
Yeah. And this is something someone just built like out of like the goodness of their heart, you know? So it's like, wow, they built this in their free time for us to just use it like crazy, which is pretty fun. I don't know if that'll work or not. My Bluebeam license expired on me, so. Let's see. Oh, it might work.
Yeah, it should. I mean, it probably just expired your full license.
There we go. I don't even know what PDF printing engine he's using actually, because Revit doesn't even have one. So I don't know how he's printing it. Yeah, we have more of a static chart. It won't be interactive, of course, because it's a PDF. I actually read a funny quote today where it said, PDF is where data goes to die. Which is kind of funny. I was like, whoa. Someone's hating PDFs over here. But yeah.
Great. Well, this is exactly what I kind of hoped for this episode. I mean, just we covered everything, touched on everything. It's don't worry if this kind of scares you away or turns you off. Once you start using it, it's actually pretty simple to use, and as everybody can see, it's extremely powerful. Yeah. So I want to thank our guests, John and Bill from Evolve Lab. Again, obviously they've shown a lot of practical stuff that we could be doing. And ironically, the biggest thing that I got out of this was when one of our own BIM managers said, clients are asking for this. we got to be able to do it. That's ridiculous to me. That
All right. Well, cool. Thanks for having us, guys. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll follow up with you guys later.
And if you can send me the recording, that'd be great. Dropbox it or something like. You got my contact info. Once again, hey, thanks a lot. I'm so glad I can call you guys friends. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You guys are awesome.
Definitely. Thank you, guys.